Sending a 17-year-old in there, going into the county jail, not knowing, never been in trouble, straight A student. It was terrifying because I didn't know what to expect. I was angry. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on.
Of all people sentenced to juvenile life without parole since 2012, 77% are Black, and this is up an increase from 61% before the Miller v. Alabama decision.
He chose to take something away from me. I wasn't a mother when I went in there. I am now. It's hard because nobody understands a kid or what we went through. Nobody takes the time to look at us as kids. All they know are, she had a gun, she had a boyfriend, she's old enough to go to jail.
In adolescence and early adulthood, there is the possibility for profound change and transformation. And the way that our criminal legal system is structured, and I think it's important to note that the U.S. is an outlier in this sense.
For years, there's been studies on the science of the adolescent brain, which shows young people's brains continue to develop well into their mid-20s. The biological immaturity means juveniles are less culpable and more capable of change, making life without parole sentences cruel, inhumane, and a violation of constitutional principles.
But it's also important for us to have a conversation about values and about what, at its core, policies like decreasing the age for juvenile life without the possibility of parole is writing off our children in our societies as people who are to be defined by their worst mistakes, as people who are irredeemable, even when we know that they haven't finished growing up and that there's possibility for transformation. We have to think about this value of writing off people as irredeemable.
I will stand for you. Could you stand for me? Everybody deserves to be free.
Really excited, welcoming our two guests, Michelle Pearson, Dr. Noor Taref, to the FreeHer Podcast, and this really, really, really very important subject of this episode that we are going to continue to explore just because it's so incredibly important. There's been an increase in the country of sentencing of life with no parole. Disproportionately, what astounds us is the increase in incarceration to life without parole of Black girls across the country, particularly in a couple of states. And that is alarming to those of us as women who do this work to end incarceration of women and girls. So this is a very important topic for us, and we will continue to talk about it, raise awareness about it, and bring both of you back on. But let's get into it right now. I want to just start by talking about Miller v. Alabama. Miller v. Alabama was the Supreme Court ruling that mandatory life sentences for those under the age of 18 amount to cruel and unusual punishment, mandating new sentencing considerations for youth. Despite that ruling, the imposition of juvenile life without parole is becoming increasingly unusual nationally, and it is applied in increasingly arbitrary and unequal ways. And for over 12 years now, since Miller, hundreds of individuals serving juvenile life without parole still have not received a second look at their sentences as mandated under Miller v. Alabama. These individuals now make up 2/3 of the total juvenile life without parole population, and as they await sentencing, racial disparities have worsened. Of all people sentenced to juvenile life without parole since 2012, 77% are Black, and this is up an increase from 61% before the Miller v. Alabama decision. So we certainly have a lot to talk about. I want to introduce you to an incredible woman, Michelle Pearson. Michelle is one of those people who's joining us today to share her story and the work that she does today. Michelle received a juvenile life sentence. She served decades in prison for her role in a robbery that ended in the loss of life. Michelle was 17 at the time of the tragic incident in 1984, and the victim herself of a violently abusive relationship with an older man. As a result, in 1984, at the age of 17, Michelle was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole because of the Supreme Court's ruling in Miller v. Alabama in August 2018, after 34 years in prison. This literally just hits me in a way that affects me deeply. Michelle finally was released. Michelle, thank you for being here. I saw a picture of you at 17, leaving the courthouse in handcuffs and shackles, crying. And as a mother of 3 daughters and sons, but of my 3 baby girls, I knew that I was looking at a child. And it was very painful to see that picture of you. Can you begin to tell us, what was life like for you at age 17 prior to this very tragic incident that took place?
My turmoil started before 17. No, it started at 10 when my mom passed away in my arms. My stepdad was a severe heroin addict who tried to molest me 2 weeks after we buried my mom. So I met my co-defendant shortly after that, who was supposed to have been my knight in shining armor. The first year in was good. Shortly after that, the abuse began. I've had my head put through a windshield. I've had him burn me. I've had him beat me. I've had him threaten putting pistols inside of me, knives. He became a drug addict. And as a result, him and his brother wanted to do a robbery. I was raising my then 6-year-old brother. They told me they wanted me to go with them. I said no. So my ultimatum was, you're going to go or we're going to kill your brother. Me being a big sister, I chose to protect my little brother, and I went with them. I did ask my victim for a ride as instructed. When I pulled the gun out to give it to her, it went off and it shot her in her neck. When I realized what had happened, my co-defendant was pulling me out the car, throwing me into his car. Because I did tell my victim I was being forced to rob her. So at that point, 17, going into the county jail, not knowing, never been in trouble, straight A student. It was terrifying because I didn't know what to expect. I was angry. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. Throughout the court proceedings, the attorneys I had, all I heard was, be quiet, we'll handle it. Nobody explained what I was looking at, what I was getting ready to endure. So, of course, when the judge sentenced me, it didn't hit me because I didn't understand it. I just knew I was being sent away. When I got to prison, that was a harsh reality. I walked into a dingy gray building that looked like an empty warehouse, but it was full of people, old, young, middle age. When I got there, I wasn't offered any kind of counseling. I was thrown into population after they cleared me through quarantine. I had nightmares of being hurt in there. I didn't know. I mean, I can't even explain the effect it had on me mentally. I just know that I didn't understand it. And it took some of the older women to sit me down at like 21 and explain, baby, this is your life. They're saying you're going to die here. You need to get into stuff. They made me get my GED, go to college. But even with doing that, I still was rebellious because I didn't understand why I was put into this place. What had I done that made you put me in here? So about 23, 24 is when I actually learned what remorse was. The severity of my crime. I learned how to grieve. I learned what the ramifications of my actions were. And even with that happening, nobody offered me help. Nobody walked me through that. I mean, I dealt with it. I became secluded. Music was my comfort. Writing was my comfort. I couldn't reach out to her family and say, listen, this is what happened. I'm sorry. I never got that chance until I got resentenced as an adult, a 50-something-year-old woman. You know, I was diagnosed with PTSD because of it. In there, being the first 17-year-old female to go in with a life without parole, they don't understand that you never took the time to see the background I came from, the abuse I endured before getting to prison. They didn't care. And I understand my victim's family was high standing in society. I was a poor black girl from poverty. I get it. Now, sitting a 17-year-old in there, you need to take time to see where they came from, what they endured, what led them down that path to make that mistake. Don't just say, I'm a monster, I'm a demon. I'm not. I did 34 years in there and I utilized it to get an education. I never thought I would see this side. I've been home 7 years as of August 28th, last month. And since I've been home, I have awards for things that I do out here. I never thought I would have them. You know, um, I work with Alternative for Girls now, women and youth that have been sex trafficked, domestic violence, homeless, and I share my story with them because I don't want them to go where I've been. It's hard because nobody understands a kid or what we went through. Nobody takes the time to look at us as kids. All they know are, oh, she had a gun, she had a boyfriend, she's old enough to go to jail. And they feel like that is the solution. It's not. I'm 59 right now, and because of where I've spent my life, it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around things because I wasn't taught how. So basically, even though I'm free, I'm not free because mentally I'm still somewhat incarcerated. I don't know how to judge people and say he's abusive. And because of it, I'm very secluded. I'm a loner. I'm not able to have relationships. I got into a relationship. That relationship became violent, like my past. But I had someone in my corner that taught me how to go get a PTO to protect myself, and even that doesn't help. So I still live in fear of, is this guy gonna kill me? How do I protect myself? What do I do? It's hard.
My- Yep, Michelle, and also we're having a little bit of audio difficulty, but I want to talk about something because you shared it with us. And our work for more than a decade has been to end incarceration of women and girls. And one of the reasons for that is because of the further harm that incarceration causes. One of those further harms, not just to women, but in every single woman's prison in the country, federal and state and county jails, women are subjected still to sexual assault and violence by the people who were put in charge of caring for you during your incarceration.
Mm.
That happened to you on top of your experience as a child at 17 of being sentenced to life without parole. You were also raped in prison by a guard.
Yeah. Um, at the age of 27, I was admitted into the University of Michigan Hospital. I was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which is an autoimmune disease. It paralyzed me. Um, I had only been up walking maybe 4 days. The guy was my guard every day. He came in one day. I had been up walking maybe 4 days. I was in the bathroom braiding my hair, which is the reason I cut it. Um, he came in, he grabbed me, he picked me up, he locked my legs under his arms and he raped me. And he told me I felt better than his wife. He wiped himself off and went and sat down. At 28, April 13th of 1996, I gave birth to my son. They gave him 2 years probation and let him go because I was serving a life sentence. I haven't seen my son since he was 5 years old. Because of it, my son doesn't want anything to do with me.
What happened to your son after you gave birth to him?
A lady that ran a program at the prison, come to find out, was his best friend. She went to a judge in Washington County and had him terminate my rights without notifying me. I didn't go to a hearing. Basically, she stole my son legally and gave him to her daughter. I can't take away from the fact that my son is phenomenal. I see him on Facebook. They gave him a wonderful life, but he's still mine. You let a guy rape me that was supposed to protect me, and they said I wasn't the first one. I was the only one that stepped up. You gave him 2 years probation, never made him register, so he's out here living his life. My son is phenomenal. He's a third degree black belt in 3 different martial arts. He's teaching it to other kids. He's a college guy, was in a fraternity or whatever that is they do. So I thank God for that. He got a life that I never had. But at the end of the day, you won't even tell my son that I'm his mother. So I don't have a bond with my baby like I should. All because your friend chose to rape me. He chose to take something away from me. I wasn't a mother when I went in there. I am now. And I haven't had chance to experience motherhood. I have to experience through my cousins' kids, through my brother's kids, other people's kids, my neighbors. I don't know what it is to be, I barely know what it is to have had a mother. But this is a system that wants to throw us in there. Now you say you want to send 14-year-olds in there. Really? Why? To damage us more? I'm damaged.
Yeah. Look, thank you. You and I had a in-depth conversation about your willingness to share what you have just shared with us. And I want to just pause for a minute and to thank you for your courage. Thank you for your willingness to do all that you do, to use your voice and to go and speak to other young women now and girls, as you say, so that they don't end up having the experiences that you had to endure. And I also want to just pause and just congratulate you on, you've just passed an anniversary of your coming home. And I'm very, very happy that you are outside here now. But voices like yours are the most valuable that we have in raising awareness to create the change that needs to happen in this country. Dr. Tarafe, I want to bring you into this conversation. It's difficult to move over to a more scientific discussion about these issues, but it's important that we talk about adolescence, that we try and help people to understand why we do not put 17-year-olds in prison and give them life at all. We're abolitionists over here, but even for people who aren't, who believe in some degree of incarceration for people, that to give a child, and 17-year-olds are children, we are always battling the adultification, particularly of Black girls. But 17 years old is a child. And to put a child in prison and give them life with no possibility of parole is just I don't know. I mean, it's like Miller v. Alabama said, cruel and unusual. For years, there's been studies on the science of the adolescent brain, which shows young people's brains, particularly the prefrontal cortex responsible for judgment and impulse control, continue to develop well into their mid-20s. The biological immaturity means juveniles are less culpable and more capable of change than their adult counterparts, making life without parole sentences cruel, inhumane, and a violation of constitutional principles like the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. It also ignores life without parole, the fact that most youth age out of crime, and these sentences are disproportionately applied to young people of color. Dr. Noor, can you help us to understand how your work, your research intersects with this science, this brain science in adolescence?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with you, Michelle. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I am an assistant professor at the Boston University School of Social Work, and broadly, my research focuses on youth and emerging adults' experiences with the criminal legal system and extending beyond the criminal legal system in reentry. And I look at the causes and consequences of contact with these systems, but also think about strategies for interrupting youth criminalization, youth punishment, and ultimately incarceration. And I've done this work closely with state agencies, community organizations, and people with lived experience who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system, young people and emerging adults. And I approach this work from a developmental perspective, which I take very seriously, that what we know from science about how adolescents and young adults also well into their mid-20s are still growing and maturing. And most importantly, from a developmental perspective, is this idea that in adolescence and early adulthood, there is the possibility for profound change and transformation. And the way that our criminal legal system is structured, and I think it's important to note that the US is an outlier in this sense, right? Even from a sort of international comparative perspective, not many other places incarcerate young people without the possibility of parole and at the rates we do, and with the racial disproportionalities that we see in the US context. But within this practice, within this system, is a foreclosure of this idea that there's hope in adolescence and development, that there is possibility for change. So my aim in doing this research, especially in doing youth engaged and youth participatory action research, is to have conversations that push beyond punishment, but also start to sort of take a closer look at our society and what we value and what we prioritize in our society, and how we treat children, and how we treat people who are at the margins of our society, and what Michelle was talking about, the sort of person in context of approach of what's going on at a sort of structural macro, but also meso community level when a young person is coming into contact with the criminal legal system, and thinking about all of that. And so it's easy. On the one hand, we have to think about the sort of impact of the criminal legal system on young people and their ability to change, their ability to not only survive, but also to thrive. And then we also have to think about the counterpoint, which is the environments and the contexts that are leading to this contact, and what obligations our systems and our policies and practices have to transform these environments.
When we talk about children, or the idea of increasing the incarceration as the current Trump administration is threatening to do, Michelle, what would you say to President Trump if you had the opportunity in regard to his intention to increase the sentencing of 14-year-olds to incarceration?
first thing I would ask them is, do you want your 14-year-old to go in there? Would you send yours to where you want to send our people? It don't make sense. What purpose does sending a 14-year-old serve when you send them to prison other than they're going to be abused? They're going to be manipulated, possibly become drug addicted. By the time they get out, if they ever get out, they're going to be mentally unstable and there's no mental health. So I want to know, Trump, since you're trying to send babies to prison, what help are you going to give them? Michigan don't have the death penalty, but you sentencing us to death. You sentencing other kids to death. I want to know if he could put his kids in that situation and allow them to spend the rest of their life in hell, because it's not rehabilitation. It's not. And I think he's wrong. His way of thinking is warped. In my opinion, he needs therapy. And maybe he needs to sit in on some groups and see what it's like.
How do we push back, Dr. On when we hear things like this? What are the ways that we can push back on even the idea? And we know it's coming. We know it's happening. We know it's happening. And to think of the increase of that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ways that we can push back on this? Is it to continue to raise awareness like we're trying to do here? What are the other things that we can do? And what are some things that you're doing as a person who teaches in this ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's very important to continue raising awareness and also highlighting and reiterating what we know, right? The facts and the evidence. We know that the research demonstrates that young people are still developing key capacities, that they have the possibility for change. We know that this has been recognized, right, from a legal perspective with a series of Supreme Court cases, Miller v. Alabama, establishing that children are different. We also have to emphasize that ignoring this body of knowledge and evidence is actually counter to increasing public safety, right? If the goal is that we are trying to increase public safety, then we have to think about the harms and highlight the harms and talk to people and sort of elevate the experiences of people who have been incarcerated for long times, young people who have faced dramatically higher risks of physical and sexual violence. They face more trauma and mental health crises and suicidality. And most importantly is that when they come out, they have often have had additional harms imposed on them. For young people, this may have the impact of, for youth in particular, of producing more harm and crime rather than reducing it or increasing public safety. And so from a policy perspective, we have to highlight the detrimental impacts of this cruel and unusual punishment and really push back against that and organize very closely with our communities also about the ways that we can prevent contact with this system and the kind of resources that we need in our communities to do that. And I think one thing for me that's really important in my pedagogical practice when I'm working with students is to sort of highlight how the US is really a global outlier when it comes to juvenile life without parole. Nearly every other country in the world rejects the idea that a child should be sentenced to death by incarceration, which is essentially life without the possibility of parole. And even our Supreme Court cases have recognized this. And despite this, there's a sort of increase in this orientation. And the research, the evidence just doesn't support the impacts on increasing public safety. And then from a sort of, we have to have a conversation. I think what's important for us to do to push back on this is to raise the research and the science and the evidence and not to make policy decisions based on fear and exceptions. But it's also important for us to have a conversation about values and about what at its core policies like decreasing the age for juvenile life without the possibility of parole is writing off our children in our societies as people who are to be defined by their worst mistakes, as people who are irredeemable, even when we know that they haven't finished growing up and that there's possibility for transformation. And I think that's also true about adults as well. I think we have to think about this value of writing off people as irredeemable, and that not being something that we structure our society around.
I want to make sure too that we make mention of, and Michelle, you really raised this in talking about your own experience, but when we talk about one of the underlying things that is always brought up when we talk about children and brain science and adolescent brain development is the ability for them to change. Well, I like to always, yes, that's true. And the brain science shows that. And it is possible. But we're always putting the indictment, on these children, as opposed to really pushing that onto society, as both of you all have articulated so well. Who needs to change? What needs to change? If a child is going through what Michelle has gone through and what so many children that we still see every single day right outside of where we are, what else? Who else needs to change? The systems need to change. Michelle, I would like to, before we close out, ask you to tell us, what is reentering been like for you? I mean, you spent 34 years in prison. Have you received? You very clearly described to us not receiving anything. And this is true today. We talk to children all the time, and young people and older people and every kind of person that goes into a prison, that is sentenced to a prison, who says the same thing, shares the same type of experience of the lack of attention to them, of the lack of resources, of the lack of care, of the lack of humanity. What has it been like for you to come home? What is the support that you've received?
As far as from the system, I was finally able to get SSI because I can't work. I now get food stamps. Um, I tried to get a part-time job at Dairy Queen. They told me I couldn't even scoop ice cream because I have murder behind my name. Um, the only support I have received is where I'm at now. I have never received support from the system. They don't want to help me get therapy. They don't want to help you financially. They don't want to help you mentally. Where's this village that they was talking about? I thought our politicians and court systems were supposed to be that village to help us. They're destroying us. And I'm going to be blunt about it. If it was not for my neighbors right now where I'm at, me and my two emotional support dogs would be starving. I wouldn't have gas in my car. They know my background, but they've loved on me. And I've never had that, so it means a lot. Kids coming out of there need some type of support, mentally, emotionally, financially. They need to know that they're worthy of getting licensed. They need to know that you're entitled to this. You're entitled to have a roof over your head. You're entitled to learn. Nobody's teaching them that. They're throwing us out here and not showing us nothing. They're not helping us. My every thought every day now is, how do I survive today? What do I do? I'm not a criminal. I got caught up in a bad situation. So my mind is not criminalized. My mind is on survival. How do I survive? How do I wrap my mind around this? I can't get a job because I have murder behind my name. My prosecutor told me, I don't care if it was 15, I'm not clearing it off your record. So I'm stuck with this stigma on me.
Mm.
We need the system to change. We need people in place that really care. If they say they care, get up here and show you care. Don't talk because you want a seat that's going to give you a check. If you're going to get that check, make a change. You can't make a change, step down. We need people that's sincere about where, don't just talk the talk, walk it.
Bold leadership.
Yeah.
At the forefront of that has to include you, has to include people with that experience. And I just want to again thank you both, in particular, Michelle, for again your courage. And mostly that you did come home. And ever since coming home, you have been using your voice to speak to as many young people, girls, like you were at 17, so that we can stop the flow, because I don't think the system is ready to stop the cruelty. I don't think it's unusual at all. And that it's up to us within our communities to do the work. We call it reimagining communities, and doing a process in the communities most entangled in the criminal law system to stop the flow of children into prisons. And so I hope that you will come on board as part of our family to continue that work, Michelle. And your voice is the most important that we should be listening to. Dr. Tarafe, I want to thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do. I want to thank you for being at a university and still having the courage to talk about these issues under the current oppression of free speech and the ability for professors to teach about these important issues. And I want to encourage you also to continue having that courage, and that we stand behind you 100%. We're going to continue this conversation. We've been looking at some cases in New Orleans, in Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, which is another state other than Michigan that just has an outrageously huge amount of predominantly Black children being sentenced, with an increase in Black girls to life without parole sentences. We're talking post Miller v. Alabama. So we have got to continue to raise awareness of this, despite all of the other fearful things that are happening in society today, because they've just opened the door to pushing a lot more of us into these places with no opportunity to get out. So again, I want to say thank you. Michelle, I want to give you the last word. Is there anything that you would like to say before we close out?
First, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say what my favorite t-shirts say. We're not free until we're all free. And that's factual. I say bring our babies home. Let's get them right.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you to both of you. Look forward to continuing our conversation in the very near future.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.